Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about using multi-currency in accounts payable. Last time we did a session, we did some transactions in accounts receivable, and you can click on the link above to find that recording. Let's take a look at our agenda. So we're going to talk about a little bit of setup. We're going to talk about looking at the currency rates and setting up currencies for vendors. And then we're going to do some processing. So we're going to create a bill in foreign currency. Then we're going to pay that bill in the same foreign currency. Then we're also going to do a bill in a foreign currency and then pay the bill in our base currency. So remember, in Acumatica, when you set up multi-currencies, you can define as many different currencies as you wish, but there is one currency that is known as the base currency. And when you create your company in Acumatica, you designate that base currency. All transactions are recorded in base currency based on the currency rate for the translation. In addition, it will track documents and other things in the foreign currency as well. But remember that all transactions in Acumatica are tracked in the base currency that you've defined. So let's start by creating a bill in Acumatica. But before we do that, let's take a look at the currency rate and the vendors. Here I am in Acumatica, and last time we talked about how to set up the rates. So today I just want to take a look at what has already been set up. So I'm going to go into currency rate history by date and just run this report. Now I have my rates set up back in 2014. So I'm just going to change my report criteria and run this. So as you can see, I have euro as a foreign currency converting to US dollars with an exchange rate of 1.0718 effective May 1st. And then the rate changes on May 15th, and then it changes again on May 31st. So remember this as we're processing our transactions. It will look at the document date and make a determination of what that exchange rate is. Now let's look at a vendor setup. So I'm going to go into payables, profiles, and vendors. And let's take a look at service company as our vendor here. So for this vendor, we've set up the currency for this vendor as euros, and we've not enabled the option to change the currency during data entry, but we did enable the option to change the exchange rate during data entry. The other thing we did for this particular vendor is we set up a checking account that is in euros. So we can enter bills in euros, and then we can write checks to this vendor out of euros as well. Let's take a look at another vendor. So this particular vendor, our currency is British pound. We did not enable the options to change the currency, nor did we enable the option to change the rate. I'm actually changed my mind as I look at that. We'll go ahead and select that. And then on the payment settings, we're going to go ahead and pay this vendor out of our US checking account. We do not have a British pounds checking account in this example. So let's go ahead and create a bill. So I'm going into accounts payable, bills and adjustments, and we're just going to enter a bill as we normally would. So I hit the plus sign for next new bill. We'll choose the vendor. And I'm going to choose the service company vendor. Now, once I've chosen that vendor, it chooses the currency automatically. And remember, I do not have the option of changing the currency. Let's go ahead and change my date here back to 2014. So if you remember that currency report, it showed that the exchange rate on May 1st was 1.0718, and then it changed again on May 15th. So it's using that rate. But if I click on that, I do have the option of changing the rate while I'm here. So this is a great way to see where the rate is coming from. It's using the rate ID of spot, and then with that rate that's defined in my table. Now we're just going to enter a bill for 100 euros, just so the math is easy. So I'm just going to put an extended cost of 100, and you can see that's 100 euros. But if we want to see how many dollars that is, we're going to push the View Base button, and you can now see that in US dollars, that's $107.18, which makes sense with our exchange rate being 1.0718. Let's go ahead and take this bill off hold and release it. Now that it's been released, let's look at the financial details and look at the general ledger posting. So as you can imagine, it's a $100 bill. So we're going to credit accounts payable $100 and debit the expense account for $100 in euros. But again, if we look at this in our base currency, which is US dollars, then we've credited accounts payable $107.18 and debited the expense account $107.18. So remember, all transactions are converted to the base currency, in my example, US dollars, but it will also keep track of the currency on the individual document as well. And different documents can have different currencies. Let's go ahead and close this. Back on our agenda then, we're now going to do a payment. So we're going to pay this bill, and since the bill was done in euros, we're going to go ahead and pay this in euros. So back in accounts payable, let's go ahead and enter the checks and payments section. Now we'll create a new payment. Our payment type will be check. We'll go ahead and choose our vendor, service company. And you can see here that our payment method, which came from the vendor, is wire, and our cash account, which also came from the vendor, is our cash account that is in euros. We'll go ahead and load our documents, and I'm going to delete this one. So here's our document. So we're going to pay 100 euros. Go ahead and pay the 100 euros, and that brings our balance to zero. But once again, we can look at the base. Let me change my payment date to May 15th. Now remember, May 15th is the date that our exchange rate changes. So our exchange rate is now 1.14. It's no longer 1.0718. So when we look at this in dollars, you can see our payment amount is $114.52, not $107. So that's kind of interesting. So let's go ahead and release this payment. And now we'll look at the financial details. And in euros, it is exactly what you would think it would be. It's going to credit the checking account in euros of 100 euros, and it's going to debit accounts payable in 100 euros. But if we look at this in dollars, it credited the checking account for $114, and it debited accounts payable, our original invoice amount, for $107.18. But then the offset to that is a debit to our realized loss in euros. So we've lost money in euros here because the exchange rate has changed between the time we did the original invoice and the time we did the payment. So even though the invoice was originally $107.18, we ended up paying $114, but that's still 100 euros. Let's go ahead and close this. So that's an example of processing a bill and paying the bill in the same currency. Now we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and process the bill in one currency, but pay it in a different currency. Back in accounts payable then, we'll enter another bill. So I'll hit the plus sign for new bill. This time I'm going to choose the company that has the currency defined as British pound. We'll make our date that so we can see what the exchange rate is 1.51. And just like we did a moment ago, we'll go ahead and add 100 pounds to the line. So this bill is for 100 pounds. And if we want to look at it in dollars with the exchange rate, you can see it's $151.81. So let's go ahead and take that off hold and release it. And let's look at the GL postings again. And once again, we would expect that to be a credit to accounts payable of 100 pounds and a debit to the expense account of 100 pounds. But if we look at it in US dollars, it's $151.81 credited to accounts payable, and the same for the advertising expense. Now let's go ahead and do our payments. So I'm going to go to checks and payments, plus sign for next new one, choose the vendor, load our documents, and we'll just delete this one. So you can see now with the date changing and our exchange rate changing, that our payment amount is actually in dollars, because the checking account is in dollars, but it's not $151, it's $149 because our exchange rate is now in our favor. So we're going to actually pay in dollars $149.22. So we're going to change this to that payment amount, which is the balance of this invoice in dollars as of this payment date. So remember, even though the original invoice was done with one exchange rate of 1.51, now we have a better exchange rate here. So we can make this change and pay this invoice, and our balance is zero. One thing to mention, in this example, I'm not going to change it, but you can always change the cross rate here, which is if you've agreed upon an exchange rate at the time that you generated the invoice, you could change this to the agreed upon exchange rate, and it would then change the amount that's being paid. We'll go ahead and take this off hold, release it after I put in a payment reference. Go ahead and release this. And once again, we'll look at the financial details. And in US dollars now, we credited the checking account $149.22, but we debited accounts payable $151.81, the original invoice amount. So that invoice has been paid in both dollars and in British pounds. And that difference is now a credit to the realized gain or loss account. So that $2.59 gets credited in US dollars here. So it always keeps track for you the transaction of the base currency, US dollars, and the exchange. And if the exchange rates have changed between the time you did the invoice and the time you did the payment, Acumatica will automatically post to a realized gain or realized loss account that you've defined to make that up. To review, we took a look at the currency rates that we previously defined in our last session. We looked at setting up the currency for the vendors and having options to allow the change of the exchange rate and the currency or not. Then we processed a bill in a foreign currency and then paid the bill in the same foreign currency. And then we looked at an example of processing a bill in the foreign currency and then making the payment in the base currency. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel and our user group. You'll find us at LinkedIn, and you can contact us at NIMS Associates at the number on your screen.